So welcome, everybody. My name is Lisa Kelly, and I work with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. And our logo is at the bottom right-hand corner. I'm going to get you to mute your microphone if you haven't, but we really want to wish you a Happy New Year and welcome you all to this session. This is a program of the Discoverability Network. And that's so the Ontario Chamber of Commerce is about 60,000 members, business members, that all are part of about 157 local chambers of commerce and boards of trade. And we create programs to make those businesses more inclusive. So discoverability is one of those, and it connects people with disabilities to employers who are looking to build inclusive environments. So thank you. This is part of a weekly series of honest conversations that happen 1 o'clock every Thursday, and you can sign up through Eventbrite. Like I said, my name is Lisa Kelly, and I'm a programs manager. Elizabeth, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Lisa. My name is Elizabeth Novak, and I am the program coordinator for the Discoverability Network. And it's a pleasure to be here. And actually, Lisa, you can go to the next slide, and it has our pictures up there. In case.
No, it doesn't. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So I wanted to do a land acknowledgement before we start, because that's an important part of being inclusive. So the Ontario Chamber of Commerce acknowledges that the work we do takes place on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, which are home to diverse nations, Inuit and Métis peoples. Our regional hubs and partners across Canada similarly gather on traditional territory of many Indigenous nations who have cared for the land since time immemorial. Now, you might go, why am I doing this? I like to put up my reasons for why I like to share the land acknowledgement. First of all, as a member of a Canadian society, we are all treaty people. I think it also recognizes the impact of colonialism, and it acknowledges my responsibilities as a non-Indigenous person, live as a treaty person. Public acknowledgement of the respect towards and recognition of Indigenous peoples and practices and ways of knowing, support those who can't protect the land, and to promote reconciliation. So welcome, all of you. Okay, quickly, before we get to Laura, which is the main point of this presentation, I want to tell you quickly what Discoverability Network is. So we have 3 primary programs. The first is a job matching technology. If you are a person with a disability, or you work with people who have a disability, and you want to connect to inclusive employers, that's people, by inclusive employers, people who are actively looking to become more diverse. Companies that, like KPMG, that recognize there's value in that. Those are the businesses on our platform. Everybody on our platform has self-identified as a minority group. So the job board is for minority groups, but predominantly for people with disabilities. So we're going to connect you to job opportunities. There's a whole, if you have questions about that, you can reach out to Elizabeth. We'll send you this very short deck with our emails and contact information on it, but really encourage you to go on there. We have about, I think about 2,000 job seekers and about 3,000 businesses, or 1,400 businesses, and we have over 20,000 jobs right now on there. So really hoping that you will come on, sign up, and become one of those individuals that gets a job through the system. We also offer free training. So we offer training to organizations, businesses, job seekers with a disability, colleges, and universities. As long as you commit to being part of our network, which means either signing up on the platform, promoting it to people, becoming an inclusive employer. And those range, and you can reach out to Elizabeth on disability, disclosure, accommodations. Today, it's going to be about language. And finally, we offer networking events that help connect employers to people with disabilities. We have an upcoming one in Ottawa. Is that not correct, Elizabeth?
Yes, so that's on Thursday, January 13th. From 12:30 p.m. till 2 p.m. We're going to be having some Ottawa employers, resource providers.
Yeah, I actually think it's going to be provincial-wide employers looking. We've had a few new companies like Hudson's Bay Company join us, and we've got Auticon for IT across the province. So a couple different organizations. So you definitely, if you're looking, please sign up and attend that. Okay, next. This is what our system looks like. We very much hope you will sign up. We are a small job board, but I like to think mighty, and I like to think that they're good matches. So can't promise you a match each and every time, but it is a valuable part of your job search tool. Please sign up as a job seeker. And if you're a business, reach out to Elizabeth or I, and we can help you get set up with an account. That's the sales spiel. Let's get into the interesting content right now. So we have a guest speaker joining us today, and her name is Laura Berry. And I am so delighted that she is able to join us because we met Laura, what, a year ago?
I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah, and we had an opportunity to, or I had an opportunity, courtesy of Laura and KPMG, to speak at an event on inclusive language. And we just hit it off. Laura actually interviewed me, so we're switching it up today, and I get to interview her. But I was so impressed with the work that KPMG did after those trainings and conversations. So Laura is a partner administrative assistant with the Department of Professional Practice at KPMG. She has a decade of office experience, specializing in executive support within the financial industry. She's a proud person with a disability, as am I, Laura. So, one-to-one there, and advocate for neurodiversity and mental health. She's also an active member of the Disability Inclusion Network, which is a KPMG Canada people network focused on breaking down barriers, reducing stigma within the firm and externally. After hours, and this is as interesting as anything else, she's an award-winning, can I get everyone to mute? Sorry, figure painting artist and a graduate of OCAD University. And she lives in Toronto with her spouse, an unaffectionate cat, and a garage that needs work.
Yes, thank you so much.
No problem. So with that said, I'm going to stop sharing, and Laura, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you share your slides and take over from here.
Thank you. So I'm just going to take a moment and share my screen. Let's do that now. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay. And what screen are you seeing? Because I have three.
KPMG inclusive language with a blue background and a mountain and a woman at the top with a flag.
Perfect. Just wanted to confirm. So at KPMG, we have a variety of different guides, and essentially we want to make sure that our people feel as welcome as possible because we believe in intersectionality. Could I get someone to mute their mic? Okay, let's try that again. Sorry, I was hearing an echo. So at KPMG, we believe that inclusive language is just an extension of our inclusion and diversity and equity initiative. We have a department that is separate from HR, specifically geared towards this initiative because it is a pillar of our company. It is something that we have goals on at year end. It is not virtue signaling by any means. This is something that we take pride in. So one of the things that we realize that we have to do is we have to equip our people with resources so that they are able to navigate this changing world. Because language, it's often evolving. It's very fluid, and I'm sure that we wouldn't use language that we used 10 years ago now. And so rather than having a guide that is a pros and cons list, we instead decided to sit down with people with disabilities and also counsel with other networks and come up with some best practices or some guidelines, which luckily I work with the Department of Professional Practice. So best practices are kind of my whole jam. So I'm going to move to what is inclusive language. So essentially, this is an overview. It's 11 slides, and we're going to go through them one by one. This is essentially the same content as our guide, but we are still waiting on confirmation to release the confidential information. So this is essentially all of the content. So what is inclusive language? Inclusive language is non-discriminatory language, which is free from words, phrases, or tones that reflect stereotyped or discriminatory views for particular peoples or groups. it helps prevent stereotyping and discrimination deliberately or inadvertently. Essentially, we want to make sure that we are using language to promote our culture within our firm, because it's one of the ways that you show the values of your firm. So when we use the term stereotyping, we mean making presumptions about people based on their unique characteristics and backgrounds. They are usually used in a negative way and are often evidence of prejudice against others. So that's an important distinction. Oftentimes people think that they know what stereotyping is and they think that they know what discrimination is, but just laying it out for everyone to understand that these are the rules we're playing by. And then discrimination means treating people less favorably than others, or doing something that has a less favorable effect on someone because of their personal characteristic, such as age, race, ethnicity, origin, etc. And this goes back to the fact that we have Bring Your Whole Self to Work, and that's another initiative that we have where we encourage people to bring their whole intersectional selves. We don't want to just see a one-dimensional characteristic when you're in the workplace, because it takes a lot of energy out of you to pass. And also, it's not the best work experience, so you're more likely to want to move on. So the company understands that it's mutually beneficial to bring your whole self, because you will be more engaged in the work environment and they are more likely to retain you for a longer amount of time. So understanding that we just want everyone to be happy and in a safe space, that's the goal that we're looking towards. So the importance of inclusive language. Language helps identify and avoid false assumptions about people, which lead us to portraying certain groups of people as less valuable. This one we're going to touch on a couple of times about accidentally referring to people as less valuable. It's very easy to do, and in our sphere, it happens regularly. At KPMG, we are essentially a microcosm or an extension of society. Therefore, we use inclusive language as a way to reflect the diversity of our people, our colleagues, and our communities, reinforcing the whole culture, essentially. So the language that we prefer is person-first language. There are usually two approaches that you'll hear about right now in modern disability communities. There's the identity-first language, which is very common in Britain. And then there is also the person-first language, which is approved by or championed by the UN, and it's most common in Canada. So it's the one that we recommend for Canada. But person-first language essentially focuses on the person, not the disability, and it is avoiding any unnecessary references to the disability. It's based off of the social disability model rather than picking out what is defective. You pick out what are people able to contribute. So we recognize that the person, before we refer to any disability that they might have, always put the person first in any sentence. If you need to do specifically refer to a disability, a person with the disability impairment is the preferred term, not a disabled person. So I can give you a couple examples. My favorite example is identity first would be identifying Willow from Buffy as a redhead lesbian, because those are both identity things. But she happens to be homosexual and she happens to have red hair. That is a person-first way of describing them. So here's another example. A child with a diagnosis of autism should be referred to as a child with autism, or a child who has autism, rather than an autistic child or a child who is autistic. These ones can sometimes be a little controversial, particularly for the autism community. Sometimes it is an identity and they feel quite strongly about that, but we're going to get to what happens in that event. These are just the general guidelines. And then the UN also recommends the term persons with lived experience of disability, because this captures the fact that disability is not permanent. It's not for life in some cases. It can be a temporary disability. And then there are also people who are impacted by disability and they have lived experiences by being caregivers or by being loved ones. And they're in this world, and we need to acknowledge their lived experience and their hurdles as well, because their opinions also matter. So those are kind of the person first language approach that we encourage. And from there, we have things to avoid. So this is 3 slides. I hope it doesn't get too negative. We try to keep really positive because we see that you're trying. You're opening this guide. You have an interest in getting it right. So good job, you. Let's continue. Things to avoid. Avoid labeling and categorizing people such as the disabled, the blind. Do not use the word normal whenever possible, because that implies that there are people who are not normal, and it's instead consider the term typical, because there are neurodiverse people and there are neurotypical people. I am neurodiverse, and people who are not neurodiverse are neurotypical as the appropriate terms for us. Also, when referring to peoples without disability, avoid using terms such as normal, able-bodied, and non-disabled, because it's just grouping people unnecessarily, and we're trying to avoid that. So avoid using terms like blind and disabled as a noun after the definitive article. So this just touches on example, the blind, the disabled. It wrongly suggests the group constitutes a separate class within society. So try to avoid that. You wouldn't go around saying the blacks, so you don't say the blind. Very helpful to kind of remember that, but I often hear people accidentally slipping up, and so that's a really good general guideline to remember. Next slide we have things to avoid is euphemisms, or the gentle beating around the bush. So however common these euphemisms may be, such as handicapped, handicapable, differently able, these terms are not as inclusive as you might imagine. These are signals that a private conversation has to be had behind closed doors, and it reflects a sense of shame in your current situation. So rather than that whole dynamic, we rather just be open. It's okay to use the word disabled, guys, so use it. But these are all euphemisms which have long been considered polite ways to refer to people with disabilities, but they should be avoided because they come off as patronizing and create unnecessary distinctions to those with disability. I grew up in the 90s, so I am very aware of the euphemisms, especially abled or differently abled, and they're well-meaning, so it's very difficult to deal with that, but it is patronizing at the end of the day. And then the last slide we have for this is don't refer to people with disabilities as superhumans or courageous or as victims, because they're just living their lives. So we don't need to be elusive about the achievements of people with disabilities when they are going about daily achievements. It is patronizing to speak about a person with disability as heroic for just going about their life and living their job. Someone who uses a wheelchair is not brave for going to law school, because there is no barrier that I can identify there that requires them to be unnecessarily brave. But they are successful, and good job them. There is a distinction there. Meanwhile, I have heard people refer to a law graduate who uses a wheelchair as brave. And that's a distinction that could not be, we should be avoiding that, I think. But much like people with disabilities, the ones with learning disabilities learn how to adapt and overcome barriers. So it's kind of suggesting that they're going above and beyond, they're superheroes, they're superpowers, but we're just living our lives. We're just human beings. And thank you for thinking that I'm cyborg, but I want to be looked at as a human, not as different, not as other. Conversely, just because someone has a disability, it does not make them weak and it does not make them a victim. People with disabilities are just as capable of having a bad day, of having a temper, of being rude. And when you don't allow for that, there's a problem there because they're just human beings. We are all just living our lives. So when you imply that they're not really capable, that's really what you're doing. Overt emotional expressions such as suffering from, afflicted by, expressing a deep regret when someone tells you about a diagnosis. These are also things to be avoided. I hear this one all the time, being in the mental health sphere. Someone says, I suffer from depression, but Jay experiences depression. Jay doesn't suffer from depression unless Jay is currently in a period requiring treatment, and then there's a period of suffering. Otherwise, that's just the state of Jay's being, and there's nothing wrong with Jay. So not suffers from, not afflicted by, but has or experiences. Those are terms that we prefer. Now into the accessibility languages for facilities. So facilities and resources are often designed with inclusion and diversity in mind, but then they're not necessarily labeled as such. So keep in mind when labeling your spaces to think about accessibility and how you can make it clear what resources are available. So parking spaces specifically designed for people who use wheelchairs are accessible parking spaces, not disabled parking spaces, because we want to make sure that people understand that they can be used for all for accessible reasons. The same goes for accessible rooms, toilets, documents, etc., because we're trying to remove barriers in the workplace. Therefore, we want to make sure that everyone is able to access these things. Recognize that disability is often the result of interactions between a person with impairment and environmental barriers that hinder their full and effective participation in society. This actually goes to the definition of disability in Canada. Disability is when you are facing a barrier, not necessarily you. So an example is an entrance without a ramp could result in a wheelchair user feeling disabled by the environment because there is currently a barrier. Everywhere else in her life, maybe doesn't feel disabled, can go about their life perfectly fine. Another example is someone with a hearing impairment may not feel disabled until everyone else reacts to a sound and it becomes apparent that they're missing something, and then it becomes an obvious barrier. We have to think about ways to make sure that they don't experience these barriers or mitigate the reactions when necessary. And then emphasis on abilities. So we really want to emphasize that they have the abilities rather than the detracted. So she is partially blind, rather than they can't walk, they have partial mobility. So it is not reflective of the person's disability. You want to reflect the person's abilities. Instead, consider using has partial vision, a visual impairment, or uses a hearing aid. Those are both perfectly acceptable. Or also uses assistive technology or uses a service dog. Because that's really what you're trying to denote from the interaction is there is something unusual. So look on the bright side. Persons with disabilities are not bound or confined to their wheelchairs. This is something that I'm sure you've heard, but this is an important one. Most people find using a wheelchair liberating as it enables them to overcome accessibility barriers that they might otherwise face, such as fatigue. So they're not bound, they're not confined. They're using an assistive technology out in the world. So it would be inappropriate to say that they are wheelchair bound, but instead they're using an assistive technology, person using a wheelchair or a wheelchair user. Those are all perfectly acceptable terms, but trying to emphasize the positive, what they are able to do rather than what the limitations are. And then the last thing that we have is don't ask. Don't assume, just ask. So I'm sure we all know what happens when you assume. It just makes everything awkward. But honestly, it makes people uncomfortable if you assume. So many people will try, but honestly, you should ask whenever you're uncertain. It's okay to get it wrong. It's okay to try and to not get it right, because chances are that person is going to then correct you, redirect you, or give you that information that you are needing. So make that effort, show that you're trying, and then they will inform you. Most people have an opinion on what they would like to be called. So it's not like this will be the first time that they're having to think about this. What would you like me to call you? That's a very simple question, and they will have an answer. So just be open to the idea that you might have to just ask. And then we have the end here. Thank you so much. But that is the inclusive language guide that KPMG put together. We have a variety of other guides, including the how to be an ally guide and how to be a more inclusive leader guide, because we believe that inclusion and diversity at KPMG really, it starts ground up and it has to be everyone every day. But at KPMG, unlike other firms where if you were to raise a concern and it would kind of be a squeaky wheel situation, here it genuinely seems to ruffle feathers when you raise an issue, because we don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. So thank you for bringing your unique lived experience to our attention. We clearly didn't think about how that would impact you. And thank you for raising that. Let's have a conversation about how we can make sure that that doesn't happen in the future. So we encourage people to raise issues, and we have local inclusion and diversity leaders that you can go to and discuss concerns. And we also have people networks that we encourage people to go to and check out. 2 networks specifically for people with disability, so that there's never any shortage of resources and there's never a question of what is available.
Thank you very much, Laura. So if people have questions, they can start putting them into the box. But I have a couple questions for you before we get started, if that's all right.
Of course.
Okay, so first of all, how did KPMG get interested in this? Like, I know that you and I spoke about a year ago at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. As I mentioned, we do provide free training, and we have worked with KPMG in the past. So thrilled that you guys reached out. And language was one of those things, but how did you as an organization decide this is really something that we need to put a focus on?
That's a great question. One of the things that we realized is that we have so many guides for so many things because we are a management consulting firm as well as an auditing firm. So we literally go on site to other companies and we tell them how to be more inclusive, and we give them guidance. So when COVID happened, we were one of the people giving out guidance for how to deal with COVID. And when our people networks raised the concern of language is a minefield, particularly with cancel culture. I'll just say it, people are afraid of being canceled. So it kind of turned into a minefield, and people were really reluctant to even discuss these issues because they didn't want to get it wrong. So we figured it would just be easier to make a manual, just put out some general guidelines, and it really has helped.
Yeah, you and I have talked about it in the past, and when I train companies, one of the things I talk about is be intentional. I'm not a huge fan of this is right or this is wrong, but it's like just decide what we as a company think is important, and then everybody share it. So I love that you've done this and you've actually put this into a form that everybody can easily digest and learn about. How are you sharing it across the organization?
Across the organization, it can be found both on our Degreed platform. We also share it on the the DIN, the Disability Inclusion Network, and it's also available for download on our portal. So anywhere people are looking for how to be more inclusive, there's an intranet portal for ID&E, inclusion, diversity, and equity. And we have a people network where we have all of our resources.
That's great that you guys have committed to doing that. Again, just shows that this is not, I mean, you and I have been, well, I know I've been training with KPMG for at least 3 years. We've been doing trainings. So, and I'm sure it goes back even further for the organization.
Yes, absolutely. And the Disability Inclusion Network, recently renamed from the Accessible Advisory Committee, they are working primarily on removing barriers in the workplace for employees of KPMG and working on awareness and understanding for allies. And then we also have the Special Friends and Family Network, which is geared primarily towards caregivers. So I was on a call an hour ago, and we were just talking about how COVID has impacted a bunch of parents who have autistic children at home, and they're kind of, what do I do? And we were talking about resources, because we understand that you do need to have a place where you can go and discuss and collaborate. So we have the people networks there as well.
Okay, so we got some questions in the chat. I've got other questions for you too, but let's deal with the ones in the chat. So would you be able to get in touch with you following the webinar? And if so,
Absolutely.
What is the best way?
Absolutely. I am on LinkedIn. If you're interested in getting in touch with me, you can also read my Courage Quarterly article that I posted there, which I don't know if you would like me to read or if I can attach.
I actually would love. So that was one of the first questions I had for Laura, and we'll attach it because I think it's so incredible the way you disclose. So I know the first time I disclosed publicly, it was an accident, and I was just so mad at everybody else in the room, people without disabilities talking about people with disabilities, and I just blurted it out. It was a rush of maybe inappropriateness and not always great. So one of the things we teach people is to tell their stories, particularly job seekers. You're telling a story, and so whether or not you embed that disability in the story is one thing, you know, and what language you use is definitely another. But I do think when we share our stories, it's like a way to share our history, share our experiences, how they've transformed us. So would you be comfortable sharing that with us right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I've
Thank
got
you.
it up here. If it's okay, I can just read it for you.
Sure.
Because it's not too long. But the article was Courage Quarterly, and it was put out GTA wide for KPMG internal networks. We do Courage Quarterly in order to encourage people to bring their whole selves to work. And so this is specifically an opportunity for people to stop hiding. So I did the article, was titled Why I Stopped Hiding. So let me see if I can present it here, actually. That might work. So I realize that I am not the best reader, being dyslexic and all. Okay. So, normal. Lately, the buzzword new normal has forced me to confront that difficult word. For much of my life, normal meant perfect. It was impossible to achieve. I studied it obsessively. I worshiped it. It was my goal for decades. I worked hard to blend in, be accepted, and become fluent in etiquette and social graces. Only when that finally happened, I felt hollow. I had earned recognition that didn't feel genuine because people didn't understand my struggle. How could they? I had never talked about it. Hiding. I have a privilege that I have been encouraged to freely use for most of my life. I am able to blend in and pass as a neurotypical person. I was taught how to assimilate, how to appear, how to act, but I wasn't able to hide. I wasn't always able to hide, especially when I was young. In my childhood, I changed friends and moved schools to escape bullying. My family moved to the city to escape homophobia. But by the end of elementary school, we had to recognize that some children were not as progressive as their parents purported to be. The bullying was so awful that my mothers closeted themselves so that I would only have to be different in one way. From then on, my stepmom was introduced as the family friend or housekeeper to all of my peers. By the time I was in high school, I was able to fully hide my difference. I was finally passing as normal. At last, I was successful in my goal, and it felt terrible. Armor. I learned that passing comes with a heavy emotional burden, and being highly on guard was taxing. To everyone but a short list of safe people, I would wear my mental armor, which, while heavy and restrictive, allowed me to withstand anything. I became versed in hiding my family and could disappear in plain sight. But that heavy armor weighed me down. And as I grew up, I had to ask myself, is my armor really helping me? I learned that taking off that armor doesn't make me exposed to the elements. It only allows me to move and breathe easily and to feel the sun on my skin. Identity. After being diagnosed at the age of 7, I received what was at the time a top education, which still fell short of our current sensibilities. I was told that I was special and had a learning disability, but given no further details. Most importantly, I wasn't taught about neurodiverse, dyslexia, or disabled. These are more than words. They connect me to identities and to a network of support. I wasn't taught self-advocacy or how to navigate resources or even which resources might be available. I struggled to find self-acceptance well into adulthood and didn't identify as a person with disability until I finally recognized I'm me. And the reason I cannot be fixed is because I'm not broken. My difference is neurological, not behavioral. I'm not stupid or lazy. I can learn strategies to overcome barriers in my life, and I have resources available to me to help me accomplish my goals. This is for life. Accepting myself as natural over normal took work and will continue to take work, but it is worth it. Natural. I remember talking to my stepson and saying, not like normal people. And he made a face like only a 12-year-old could and casually said, there's no such thing as normal people. And that hit home to me. This child understood something that took me almost 3 decades to get. The truth is that no one is normal. We're all multifaceted. We all have multiple or intersectional identities that impact and shape us. Rather than hide this, the modern world is now encouraging us to share our unique perspectives because we now know that our strength comes in our differences and we're stronger together. My differences aren't a drawback. They add genuine value, not a victim. At some point, I realized that someone hurting me doesn't make me a victim, it makes them a bad person. I might not have 100% certainty of my safety, but no one does. And in being vulnerable to attack, I'm joining the masses. I've been hurt, and I know that I will heal. It's not that I'm unafraid, but I understand that courage is knowing you're afraid and doing it anyways. Ultimately, I'd rather live a short life in the sun than an eternity in darkness. Trust fall. Disclosing my disability at KPMG was like a trust fall, only with significantly higher stakes. I knew I wanted to grow my career with the company, only I worried about being perceived as different. Then I remembered the weight of the armor and the lessons I'd learned. I cannot intentionally blend in and then get mad when people don't see me. I cannot force myself into a box and then wonder why I'm uncomfortable. It was scary, but ultimately I mustered the courage to be me and to allow people the opportunity to be the friends and allies who I wanted them to be. Thank you.
That is just so amazing. I don't know how everybody else feels about that, but I just think, that touched me so much. So thank you for sharing that. We had in the chat, somebody had asked, well, but I'm nervous, right? And I think that just addresses your process for going through that.
Mm-hmm. And it definitely is a trust fall. It feels like you're about to jump off of a cavern, but people will surprise you.
It's so true. So I actually went on a webinar just over Christmas, and talked about my disability and how that happened. And I didn't tell my company about it. I didn't really talk about it at the OCC. I mentioned it a bit, but didn't give details. And then our CEO saw it, and he called me into his office. And he goes, Lisa. And then he said, it really meant a lot. And over Christmas, the last thing he did was ask people to watch it. And I didn't realize the impact that might have. And it reminds you of how there are amazing people out there to support us that we forget about. And you're right. How can we ask people to see us if we don't show them who we are? So Thank you. Now, Arena has a question. What are some reasons for why companies are not ready to learn about diversity and inclusion? Is it fear, lack of funding, and how do you make it a priority?
I think it would be a combination of both, exactly what you said, fear and lack of funding, because people don't know where to go, they don't know where to start, and they worry that it would cost too much. So they just stick to what they know. And while that might be the way that things are for them, I encourage them to find free resources, because there doesn't have to be a top-down. Thank you, Lisa.
Exactly. Can we name one free resource you KPMG has worked with has been helpful? Would you happen to know who they are? Name Discoverability Network.
I suppose Discoverability Network, because there really are.
We're here for free,
materials.
guys. Yeah, so we actually have an inclusive language training module. That's one that's very popular with businesses. So if you want a free, we're definitely there. Or we can connect you to other free resources out there, like able2learn.ca. I love that one now.
I was about to say, I helped workshop that one, so I can vouch for it.
And I gave them your name because I helped develop it. So we were part of that as well. So there are so many great tools out there, guys. And sometimes it's just you don't know where they are. So Laura, KPMG, do you offer free ones, or should we direct them to the OCC as well?
We redirect them to the OCC and to Able2. But we are working on that being something that the DIN can do in the future. Currently, we're focused on teaching our rather large global staff.
No, and that's your job, right? Your job isn't to go out there and train everybody else for free. That's why the Ontario Chamber of Commerce has done this. That's why we have this program. And there are like Microsoft. If you guys want to start on great diversity tools, Microsoft has a free learning division for everybody. That's amazing. There are so many great places you can tap into. If you don't want to come to the chamber, that's fine. There are some amazing ones. Reach out to us. We'll direct you. We link to them on our website. So if you go to discoverability.ca, you can actually just directly connect from there. But also hearing from experts, because I actually think your guide is so lovely and simple. What was the process you went about to get that guide?
Process involved a lot of back and forth between the people networks and then just research. So I mentioned we have the Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity division. So there is a manager who is part of that department, who's also on the DIN, because he also is a person with disability. And he really championed putting this together, coordinating with HR to make sure that it was all KPMG approved wording, and then getting it published. But it took at least 6 months to kind of make sure that there were no questions. And we really used the UN guidance heavily, because if it's already been written, why are we going to reinvent the wheel?
Yeah, that's so true. And you had the participation of people with disabilities in writing it or referring to it as well?
Yes, heavily.
Nothing about us without us, right? That's the saying.
Exactly. And while we might have many opinions, at least we get a say.
Well, yeah, no, it's very true. So, it's interesting when you were talking about the person first or identity first language, because increasingly I've seen a third perspective come up. Ooh. Which is that, so identity first this is an embedded part. So I am autistic. You'll hear a lot of people say that because it's such a large part that they don't
core part of their identity.
I am deaf, I am blind. So those are some of the groups that I see more of that identity first language used quite commonly. Then, of course, we have people who have a disability. That's generally the one that I use. It's in Canada, it's popular. But I've heard people recently make an argument that society disables us. So I'm a disabled person, not because it's my identity, but because society's disabling me. Which I don't even know what we call that, but it's a really valid argument, I think.
It is a valid argument, and it's basically an extension of the social disability model, which says that people are all unique and it's the environment that disables you. So I wonder what terminology, because as I said, language is fluid and always growing. If this is a new thing that we have to account for, I'm excited to see where it goes.
I know. I love following on social media, and just because this is actually a really big topic. And if you ever want to, just go on social media and follow some of the conversations around this, it's interesting. And a lot of people, depending on your generation, prefer what you and I might think is outdated language.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. That's their preference. So you defer to that. But I really think we should be intentional and be thinking about why we're using and making the choices that we are.
Exactly. I'm more than happy to use whatever, if someone refers to themselves as an Aspie queen, then so be it. But you have told me that that is an appropriate term to use for you. I would never, in my right mind, walk up to a stranger and call a person with autism an Aspie queen.
I love that. I love that. That's actually a really good example. And some of your examples I noticed dealt with that intersectionality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So tell me a bit more about that, because I'm not sure everybody on the call will necessarily know what we mean by that.
Absolutely. So intersectionality is the concept that we are multifaceted. Think of a gem, think of a diamond and the many sides that that has, rather than a sheet of paper, which is flat. And I know that in the corporate world before, we were encouraged to be that flat, one-dimensional thing, but we understand that there's more to us. So intersectionality is the concept that I can have multiple identities going on at the same time. I can be a female, Canadian, historian, separately, sure, but most likely all at the same time, because my Canadian origins as a female will impact my studies as a historian. These all interact with each other. And it's okay to acknowledge that we have multiple identities that are all equal at the same time.
Yeah, and I always think on this discussion of intersectionality, it's interesting, particularly with disability, because they can layer up the barriers as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we look at employment data, it can, being a female can affect your employment versus a male, or the wage you make. But then a female with a disability, or a person of color who's a female with a disability, and we start layering them up, and it becomes a lot more challenging for people. And understanding that is an important part, I think, of the inclusion journey. Would you agree with that? Or
I absolutely agree. And I love the example that you gave, because it really goes to the core of the fact that people, particularly people in our community, have so many different titles and so many different diagnoses going on that you kind of feel weighed down by all of them. You're you, and you can show whatever side of you that you want at that current moment, but all of them make you.
I just had a shiver when you said you're you, and I loved it because it felt like it was just speaking directly to me. So thank you. So I'm going to sign off at this point. Stay on, because we're going to take some questions that you may not want to have on the recording or talk to Laura directly. So we're going to stop with the recording.